Many Christians around the world are beginning to see the value of learning about and participating in the biblical holidays, such as Passover, Pentecost, Sukkot, and so on. Many have learned that the biblical holidays were not abolished and in fact are still God's appointed times with his people. And not only do the biblical holidays look back and commemorate important events in the history of the people of Israel, they also commemorate what Jesus has done and will do. So once one sees the value in the biblical holidays, the next logical question is, when are they? Well, all one has to do is look at even a regular North American calendar and you'll probably be informed of when they are. If that fails, then you can simply visit any number of Jewish websites that will make the Jewish calendar available to you. So without too much effort, you'll be able to know when the holidays begin and end and what dates those correspond to on our Gregorian calendar. There's a problem though. There are some in what is called the Hebrew Roots movement who claim that the Jewish calendar is not accurate, that we shouldn't be following the Orthodox Jewish fixed calendar, but instead we should be following those who cite the moon and declare the months themselves. But are they right? Do they have the authority to propose an alternative calendar? What can we learn from the example of Jesus and the apostles? To answer these questions, let's look a little closer. One of the first commandments given to the people of Israel was the commandment that the first month, the month in which Passover occurred, was to be the beginning of months. It says in Exodus 12 verse 2, "This month shall be the beginning of months for you. It is to be the first month of the year to you." But how were months determined? Well, in biblical times, the beginning of a month was determined by the sighting of the new moon. The new moon, or Rosh Chodesh, refers to when the first crescent of the moon is visible. This occurs approximately every 29 days and makes up the length of each month. Now, the declaration of the new moon was the responsibility of the leadership of Israel to ensure that there would be a set calendar for everybody to uniformly observe. Along those lines, there is the commandment in Leviticus 23, which says, "Speak to the sons of Israel and say to them the Lord's appointed times, which you shall proclaim as holy convocations." So it was the duty of the leadership of Israel to proclaim the appointed times and to ensure that all of Israel was unified in their observance of them. It's not the responsibility of the average person to decide when the months start or when the appointed times are. And furthermore, the Torah does not grant the average person the authority to make those kind of declarations. In fact, if it was up to each person to decide for themselves, then what would inevitably result would be numerous calendar systems being practiced, with factions each following their own calendar and observing the appointed times at different times. And actually, that's what happens when people take it upon themselves to declare the new moons. This is what happened in the first century. The Essenes did not follow the majority calendar, and that disconnected them from the majority of Israel. They were off on their own, observing the appointed times at different times from the majority. And something similar happens today among those in the Hebrew Roots movement. Instead of following the fixed calendar that the majority of the people of Israel follow today, they are off on their own. And even among themselves, unity cannot be found. Some are off observing the calendar one way, and then others observe it a different way, leaving some to observe the appointed times on one day, while others observe them on a different day. Now, this is surely not God's ideal. God's ideal is that his people are unified and they observe the appointed times together. And for followers of Yeshua, followers of Jesus, this shouldn't be too difficult. All we need to ask is, what did Jesus and the apostles do? And it's not a mystery. We can read all throughout the Gospels and the book of Acts that Jesus and the apostles were right there along with the majority of Israel, celebrating and observing the appointed times according to the popular majority calendar. For example, in John chapter 7, we read that Jesus was there in Jerusalem along with the rest of the majority of Israel celebrating Sukkot. And of course, in Acts chapter 2, we read that the apostles were there among the majority of Israel celebrating Pentecost, Shavuot. Instead of following splinter groups like the Essenes who had their own calendar, it appears that Jesus and the apostles followed and observed the popular majority calendar, the calendar that was established by the ruling authorities over Israel, the Sanhedrin. Now, the same options are before us today. We can either follow the current Orthodox Jewish calendar, which was established by the last legitimate Sanhedrin in the 4th century, or we can follow any number of random people who cite the new moon and establish their own calendar system, which will effectively disconnect us from the larger community of God's people. So I believe that we should follow after the example of Jesus and the apostles and defer to the authority of the established Jewish community. It's not the place of anyone today to decide when the months begin and when the appointed times are. Now think of it this way. When Jesus returns and he establishes his authority over Israel and over all of God's people, well then it will be his prerogative to critique or change the current observance of the calendar. But until then, I believe it is best to follow the example that he left for us in the 1st century and to demonstrate unity with the majority of God's people and to observe the calendar that is already in place. So with that in mind, I say to you, Chag Sameach. I hope that you will enjoy the upcoming holidays.